Okay, everybody, I just want to thank you for coming out tonight, especially in this weather, and all you brave, hardy souls. My name's Kevin Peck, if you don't know me, I'm one of the board members of the Historical Society, and take care of a couple things. Our next meeting will be in April. Tentatively, it's going to be the third Monday in April. We haven't nailed down a speaker yet, but we want to put that on the calendar, the third Monday in April. I first met Jonah about 3-4 years ago. Bennington Cemetery had a big vandalism. There was a large number of stones vandalized, and Tom of Voca, Vice President of Voca, contacted Jonah and said, we'll go down and help you. And so Tom and I went down, and Jonah, I assume, was kind of heading up the project of the, organizing everything, and we were repairing the stones. The next following year, went back down there again to the same cemetery. And then it was kind of a couple years or so, the last fall, Kingsley Cemetery in Bennington. I got out of my car, my wife and I got out of the car in Bennington, it was out in the woods somewhere. Got out and I looked at this cemetery, it was like 110 burials. I think one stone was standing. When I said this, my heart just, this is going to be a project here, repairing these, but we got going. And that's my first really, the other two times Jonah was running around, it was a very large cemetery. This was a cemetery maybe twice the size of this room. So I was able to spend some time talking with Jonah, and I got to know more about him. He was more than just an employee of Bennington, the city of Bennington. And so I also found out that Jonah was going to be speaking at the Rutland Historical Society the first weekend of last October. So we went from Tom and I and Carl went from the cemetery project to that meeting and listened to him speak. And I said, that's the guy I need to come to Clarendon. So I reached out, he agreed, and so we're here tonight. And I want to just thank you. He came from Bennington, and he
it's usually an hour drive, it was 2 hours.
Oh, yeah, so he was planning on being here at 5:30, so he was 45 minutes behind, and so I just want to thank you for coming anyways, and I also want to say, feel free, you've got an hour to speak, an hour or so, but feel free, look at the clock and think of the conditions of going out the door whenever you're comfortable.
Oh, okay, I thought you were going to say we could be here all night. So.
The last time I saw him speak, he was in full 1775 garb, and he's got in the car, but I said, no, let's just get upstairs and get on with this. So, Jonah, it's all yours.
Well, thank you for that. I actually left even earlier because the weather was starting to look a little bad in Bennington. Little did I know it was ending up with whiteout conditions. It was interesting. So it's great to be here, and I'm very impressed by how many folks come out, and that's a testament to Vermonters, right? I mean, a little snow, it's fine, we'll be good. So I do want to thank Kevin and the Clarendon Historical Society for inviting me out tonight. It's really a pleasure to be here. As Kevin said, my name is Jonah Spivak. I do wear a lot of hats. Sadly, not my funny tricorn hat. As he said, it is in the car, but with the lateness of the hour, I figured it doesn't make sense to do that. But my day job is I work for the town of Bennington. I'm their communications coordinator. And in that role, they've also appointed me their official 250th liaison, which is convenient because I get to do the stuff I love, and it's actually part of my role as well. So kudos to Bennington for putting a little skin in the game towards the 250th. So if you ever happen to talk to the Bennington town manager, make sure you mention how valuable and useful that is. I'm also one of the 14 commissioners that was appointed to Governor Scott's Vermont 250th Planning Commission, along with Tom Hughes, who's right here today. So good to see you. And in addition to that, I'm the chair of our Regional Bennington County 250th Planning Committee, and I'm also the volunteer organizer for the Northeastern Regional States 250th Planners. So more about that later, because the fun stuff is talking about our state. And the fact is we did play a major role in the founding of this country. especially during that 1775 to 1777 time period. And today we're going to talk a little bit about that role, as well as past commemorations and plans and ideas for the upcoming anniversary years. And if you've heard me speak before, which some of you in this audience most certainly have, you'll know that you've seen this presentation before, or at least big chunks of it. So I apologize for that. Hopefully there'll be a golden nugget or two that is new in there for you. And while my present today is really focused on Bennington and the Bennington region, which is my area of expertise, I hope it might be helpful in informing any efforts you might be doing here in Clarendon for the 250th. And I wonder, is anyone here, other than Tom, involved in any 250th plan? You are. All right, very good. And you are as well. Okay, wonderful. And Ward, yeah, and you as well. You're a 250th organizer for the area. Yeah, very good. Awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear that. So we'll go ahead and start with, this is perhaps an obvious question, but why commemorate? Why do this? Other than the fact that it happens, or seems to happen, every 50 years or so. And I've been working on this many years. I started thinking about this in 2017 because I thought 10 years, that's the right amount of time to plan for a commemoration, which of course for us doesn't end until 2027. So this year is different from prior years, however, because in prior years we talked about the anniversaries that were coming up. Now we are officially in those anniversary years. And by the way, the 250th is also known as the semi-quincentennial. Has anyone heard that before, bandied about? Okay. What about bicentenary?
No.
That's a good one. Do you like that? It rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Yeah, no, that is another way of saying it. Has not caught on for whatever reason. Personally, I find myself just saying the 250th, and we're going to kind of go with that. But I really started first thinking about these anniversaries as part of my interest in local history, and in particular the Battle of Bennington, and it kept sidestepping over into how the battle was commemorated over time. And in fact, the Battle of Bennington is kind of unique because it's the only battle of the Revolutionary War that's been continuously celebrated since it happened. But no, I was corrected. At the 2019 Congress of Revolutionary Roundtables, a woman from North Carolina said, no, I have to correct you because the Battle of Cowpens also has been continuously celebrated since every year since it happened. I said, that's lovely, but by the way, that didn't happen until 1781, so the Battle of Bennington is still the longest continuously celebrated battle in the Revolutionary War. But that's the fun, right? Getting to share those sort of perspectives. So it seems we are compelled to remember our past, and in addition to those annual celebrations, we've had some really big ones. 1877, that was the centennial of the founding of the Republic of Vermont. That was a big one. 1891, that was the centennial of statehood, where they finally let us into the Union. And that was also the dedication of the Bennington Battle Monument. A 306-foot-tall obelisk in Vermont. Yeah, still nothing like it outside of Washington, D.C. And it's fair to mention 1927, that was the biggest of the commemorations, and of course 1976, and many of you probably remember 1976. I had just moved to Vermont the year before, in 1975, and was here for the battle reenactment in 77, and it was awesome. I was like, wow, I can't wait for next year! And sadly, it didn't happen the next year, and little did I know it would be another, as we're finding out, 50 years, and that I myself would end up being involved in that kind of an effort. So sharing this history, sharing our stories, this can unify us. At a time when civic engagement and civil discourse is in real jeopardy, we need these lessons that history can teach us, more than ever. And here's a good quote, I love this one. This is from James Baldwin. It was quoted in an exhibit at the Bennington Museum. He writes, "History does not refer merely or even principally to the past. On the contrary, the great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it within us, are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways, and history is literally present in all that we do. Yeah, I love that. Did you know that 30% of the historic organizations in America were founded around the bicentennial in 1976? Yeah, it's significant. And that was because of all the excitement that was generated around that bicentennial. And it is my continued hope that the 250th will have a similar effect, not just to inspire these aging groups of historians, but also to excite that next generation of stewards that we will be looking to take our place in the future. So, in Bennington, to further this work, we created our committee, and you can see these are the guiding principles of our group. And I'll just mention a couple. For us, it was important that we were regional. We wanted to support and plan events. We knew that was happening. We also had a special place in our heart, of course, for the Battle of Bennington and the Green Mountain Boys, and a gentleman by the name of Sip Ives, you may not have heard of. But Sip Ives was the one Green Mountain boy who was killed at the Battle of Bennington at the penultimate moment when we did not know if we would win or lose. And that gentleman was a man of color. He was a black man from the militia in Massachusetts who joined the Green Mountain Boys and spent most of his military career in Vermont and died for our freedom. There's other things up there as well, and really this is the kind of, to give you an idea of like, well, if we were going to do something in our community, what would those principles be? And that can give you a sense of what we've done, but also would be influenced on what sort of things are important to you here in your community. But I'd say that last bullet, that's really important regardless of where you are. That's promoting pride in the community and civic engagement. All right. So like I said earlier, this year is different as it's our first anniversary year and now into our second. And that begs the question, why a 3-year anniversary? What's all this mucking about? We know that the Declaration of Independence, the 250th anniversary of that, is this summer. And we even know the date, right? Right? We all know the date, July 4th. You know nothing else. You might not even know what it's for, but you know you're going to have a picnic on that day. There's probably going to be fireworks involved. But for us, we had to start in 2025 because that was the story of Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys and the capture of Fort Ticonderoga and Crown Point. That was Vermont's moment on the national stage, the first offensive victory of the American Revolution. So we couldn't miss that. We couldn't skip that. And it was wonderful working with our partners throughout Vermont, including Castleton with Tom's help, to tell that story of the expedition. And of course, this year, as we said, we all know what this year is about. But it's, in my mind, whatever happens here is really just to propel us to Vermont's signature anniversary year, and that's in 2027. And that, of course, is the founding of the Republic of Vermont and the battles of Hubbardton and Bennington. More about that later, no surprise. So I mentioned the Vermont 250th Commission. What's that all about? I would say that one thing that was important to us, beyond establishing that it had to be 3 years, not just 1 year, was that we didn't want it to just be about the battles of the Revolution. And that's really, the founding of the nation. That's the story of the war, right? That's the capture of Ticonderoga, the Battle of Hubbardton, the Battle of Bennington, and of course the Declaration of Independence, freeing ourselves from those scoundrels over there in England. But the parallel story to that for us is the founding of Vermont. And that's interesting because it allows us to broaden the scope of what we're thinking about in terms of these anniversaries. And that's the story of how we started, the Westminster Massacre. That was in last year. We have the Dorset Conventions last year and this year. And of course, culminating in the Declaration of Vermont's independence, not from England, but from everybody. And the fact is, we have amazing stories to tell. Our state was born in the crucible of revolution, and we played a major role. And, as you heard a minute ago, our story is more diverse than is commonly known, and that can unite us. And finally, let's take advantage of these anniversaries to shine a spotlight on those underrepresented stories and increase civic awareness. And you've got some great stories right here in Clarendon. We have Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Wade, and of course, thanks to Kevin Peck for bringing me to this. I love these tidbits. So, Joseph Wade, he's buried just down the road. So he's in the middle corner of Middle Road and Moulton Avenue. So, right, it's just down the street.
Look out the window and
Wow. That is awesome. And the site has been diligently maintained by Kevin and friends, so thank you for that. So he is an interesting story, much like many people involved in the American Revolution. He had actually, he was not new to war. He had fought in the French and Indian War. And so he was a veteran. And in fact, he had served with Robert's Rangers, one of the most storied units in the French and Indian War. And I often wondered, maybe he knew John Stark, because Stark also was in Robert's Rangers. That's an interesting thought. And he had a pretty impressive resume. He enlisted in 1754. He was at the Battle of Lake George under Ephraim Williams. By the way, he was the founder of Williams College. And a lot of you Clarendon folks probably know this, right? Because where did I get this information? The Clarendon Historical Society. He also participated in the Siege of Louisbourg and the Battle of Quebec. And for his services, he was awarded 500 acres of land. When fighting started out again, this time against his former compatriots, now, of course, the French and Indian War, known as the 7-Year Wars, if you're European, he, of course, was a British soldier, fighting for the British. And now, it's the Revolutionary War, times have changed. He joins the Continental Army right at the start in 1775, and he joined Bedell's Regiment of Rangers, again a ranger unit, and participated in the invasion of Canada that year. That was in 1775. It's always amazing to me, people are like, gosh, we invaded Canada in the Revolution. Not only that, we did it the first thing. It was like one of the first things we did was, let's invade Canada. We're going to free ourselves from Britain. Let's invade Canada. So he was part of that. Spoiler alert, did not go so well. And in fact, he was part of the retreat from that as well. But in 76, he was still enlisted, and he was with Benedict Arnold in the naval engagement, the Battle of Valcour Island. And that was, of course, the battle that decided, finally, control of Lake Champlain. It was the precursor to the campaign of 77. But that successful, let's call it a delayed action, meant that the attack on New England could not happen for another year. So it delayed the British by at least a year. Unfortunately, in that battle, he was wounded. He got some shrapnel in his head. He was seriously wounded enough that they made the decision that he should be sent home to recover. And unfortunately, he didn't make it that far. He made as far as right here in Clarendon, where he did finally pass and was buried by his brothers in arms. Speaking of brothers, 7 brothers in his family enlisted in the Continental Army. 5 earned commissions, 2 and 4 of those 7 gave their lives in the Revolutionary War. So really a pretty awesome, unique story about a quite esteemed and decorated soldier, literally in our backyard. So we talked a little bit about 77. This is a big deal for us in this area. This entire region was caught up in the invasion, if you will. Of course, you all know the story. This is a map of the plan by the man, Gentleman Johnny. He had envisioned a 3-pronged approach, of which you see 2 of the prongs, because the 3rd prong, which was supposed to be Howe coming up from New York, never happened. He instead went to Philadelphia and attacked Washington there, and ultimately captured Philadelphia. But to the chagrin of Burgoyne, that did not help him any. It did not divert any troops, and in fact, his other attack from the west, that St. Leger, he ends up getting foiled at Fort Stanwix. He tries to take it, is never able to. There's a nice battle there in Oriskany. That fails, he heads back. Burgoyne, however, he's doing better. The way has been laid open by the previous year's work by Carleton and getting rid of the Continental Navy on Champlain. So he was rolling right down, unstoppable. This is the world's superpower of the time. They're crushing him. And you can see here on the map, there's the Fort Ticonderoga, he takes that. Then the next day, July 7th, that's the Battle of Hubbardton. And I guess, and of course, you see Bennington on there as well, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The goal, of course, is Albany, and they never get there. I love the Battle of Hubbardton. That's not too far from here. Anyone here been to the Battle of Hubbardton site? Yeah, it's most of you. That's awesome. It's almost unique in how beautifully the landscape has been preserved, and all of you know it is just so drop dead, stunningly gorgeous. So a wonderful place to visit. And of course, this was the first clue for the British that this campaign might not be as easy as they thought. Burgoyne thought he had this going on. All his letters back to England were very positive. I am kicking it. I'll be in Albany before you know it. This is great. But the Battle of Hubbardton, while it was a British victory, I would describe it as a Pyrrhic victory. In Bruce Ventnor's book, he talks about the casualty rate for the British. Does anyone remember that? I was trying to remember that on my way up. I think it was between 30, what was it? 50%? I was going to say
50 people.
Casualties on the British?
50 British killed.
50 British killed. What was the casualty rate? Do you remember, like in percentages? Because I want to say he said it was like 30 or 40% casualties. Does that sound right? We'll have to consult Bruce to check that.
I think it's high.
Yeah. Well, whatever it was one of the highest rates of casualties that they had ever experienced up to that point. So they really did get their nose bloodied there. And of course our friend Seth Warner was at that. He was one of the commanders at that battle. And he was in command of that rear guard action. What was their purpose? It was to prevent them from catching the remnants of St. Clair's army that was retreating from Ticonderoga. And in that they were successful. So you could argue that this was in some ways a successful battle, despite the British remaining in command of the field. Oh, and by the way, let me jump back for 1 second. I mentioned about how Vermont was born in the crucible of revolution, and we'll look at dates more later, I think, but July 7th was the Battle of Hubbardton. July 8th was the day that Vermonters voted on their new constitution. So the Battle of Bennington, of course, this was at the tail end of his invasion of Vermont. And there's a lot I could talk about with this, and I know we could be here all night, but I'll defer that to later, possibly. I have a bunch of things written there. These are all talking points, interesting things about the battle. I'm not going to go through them. I'll just point out a few of them in the slides ahead. But I do want to point out that one thing that's really fun about the battle is we have this great map. This was drawn by Lieutenant Durnford, a lieutenant for the British at the battle. So this is his notes. He was in charge of designing the fortifications of the battle. Fun fact, in the north, which normally we think of as being the top of the map, is actually on the right side of the map. So in your mind, you have to visually flip it. It's actually made some hilarious historical mistakes as a result of that, for people that didn't realize that. There's even some old signage at the battlefield that indicates that. But in addition to things like this map, we have over 200 first-hand accounts of the battle. So it's pretty exciting to have that much information about the battle, although ironically, there's virtually no first-hand accounts that I'm aware of the center of the battlefield, which is literally right in the center of that map. It's kind of hard to see, and I don't have a pointer here, but in the center of the map, that's the bridge over the river. And that was the strategic point for the battle, and it was the center of the battle. That's where both commanders were, that was where the largest number of troops were. That was the strategic point that they were ultimately fighting over. The big hill that you see sort of in the right-hand side, that's known as Hessian Hill. That represents the extreme left of the British position. And then that smaller fortification that you see sort of in the bottom left of the river there, that's known as the Tory Fort, or Tory Breastwork. And that was the right side of the British position. But again, the reason they expanded out was ultimately to protect that center position of the battlefield. And I don't know if you've ever heard this, but you know, a lot of people are like, the Battle of Bennington, it wasn't even in Vermont, right? Has anyone heard that? No? In Bennington, we're very, what's the word for it?
Biased?
Biased? Yeah, we are that. That's not what I was thinking of, but that is definitely true. Sensitive. Very sensitive to this, because we have this wonderful monument. They're like, the battle happened here? No, it didn't. It happened over there. So here's a map of Vermont in 1780, and this is, and what you might not know is that in 1780 and 1781, there's a period called the Greater Vermont period. And I'm like, why didn't I learn about this in high school? Because it's so interesting. During those 2 years, the Vermont annexed the eastern part of New York up to the Hudson River. And then by annexed, I mean those towns there voted to secede from New York and join Vermont. In part because the New York system was really trying to recreate the tenant-farmer situation that they had in England with these massive landowners, and everyone was just renting land from the landlord. Whereas in Vermont, you owned your own land. And not only that, you had a say in your own government. This was a radical notion. People liked that idea. So for those 2 brief but glorious years, that was an approximate outline of the state of Vermont, and then sadly we did end up giving it back to New York, and as you can see, the arrow indicating the battlefield is just over the border. Yes?
Can I get a picture of that?
Yeah, by all means. There you go.
What year Jonah McGill was dated?
1780 to 1781. Now here's a fun, not as cool fact. We also annexed the western part of New Hampshire. Yeah, that's a little more awkward, right? Because they're our buddies, they saved us and everything, but that happened. But again, it was because those towns voted to join Vermont. But that was, again, a little less awkward, so I don't have that shown on the map. And actually, my map is not as good as former Governor Douglas's map. He was at a presentation to social studies teachers this past November of last year, and he had a slide showing the Greater Vermont period, and it was much nicer done in terms of the specific towns along the borders, east and west, that joined Vermont as part of that period. Former Vermont Supreme Court Justice Thomas Mello? Mello was the last name. I'm not sure about the first name.
He's a judge, not a Supreme Court judge.
Oh, was he a regular judge?
Yeah.
Thank you. He wrote a wonderful book about Moses Robinson, and in that he has an extensive section on the Greater Vermont period, so if you're looking for a resource to learn more about that. So anyway, there he is. There's Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne, apparently a pretty decent playwright in his own, back in England, and pretty well respected for that. And this, I mentioned earlier how Burgoyne had been kicking it for the entire campaign up until Bennington. And after Bennington, 4 days after Bennington, he writes a letter to Lord Germain, his boss. And this is the first one where he starts to make excuses. Why maybe things weren't going to turn out as well as he had hoped. And in fact, part of the letter is here, but I'm going to read part of this. This is my favorite quote of John Burgoyne's, and he says, "The Hampshire grants, Vermont, in particular, a country unpeopled and almost unknown in the last war, now abounds in the most active and most rebellious race on the continent, and hangs like a gathering storm upon my left." I love it. Huzzah! It's such a great quote. Thank you, Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne, for that. By the way, Gentleman Johnny, that phrase came from historians later on. They didn't call him that at the time. All right. So a couple of interesting facts. I wasn't going to belabor the details, but I did want to mention, so more men were killed and captured at the Battle of Bennington than at either of the battles of Saratoga. And the other one is, it's supposedly the first storming of an emplaced artillery position by a militia. And this was actually really important because it ties into one of the reasons why the Battle of Bennington was that vital first link in the chain, as Thomas Jefferson called it, to victory at Saratoga, is because it inspired the militia. So the Battle of Bennington was an incredible success. Killed and captured almost, it was like 800 or 900. It was almost the entirety of the force that came after them. And the militia even got paid. They got their share of the booty from the battle. And after this amazing, stunning victory, there was about 30 or 40 casualties on the American side, by the way. So this was an absolutely complete victory and a devastating defeat for the British. And it enthralled the militia. And after this, from the time of August 17th to September 17th, in that 1 month period, over 10,000 militia showed up at Saratoga to help with the fight there. And that's a direct result of what happened at Bennington. That news traveled like wildfire. So, instead of a depressed group trying to face down the world superpower, you now had the militia pouring in their thousands to join Gates to ultimate victory at Saratoga. It was really a stunning thing. So probably the psychological effect of the Battle of Bennington, aside from the loss of the military stores and everything else that it represented, may have been the most important feature. Let's see, so the battlefield in the second engagement, I mentioned this in part because, I showed you that map of the battlefield, and in fact, that far left position of the British on Hessian Hill, that ended up being the Bennington Battlefield Park. A lot of people visit the Battle of Bennington, they go up to the top of the hill, they see the monuments that are grouped around there and like, this is it. But in fact, that was just the first engagement, and it's important to talk about that because in the first engagement, we had a lot going for us. We outnumbered the British force by probably at least 3 to 1. We knew their exact layout of all their positions. We were ready for them. And they pulled off a pretty incredible double envelopment attack on the position. So that's all well and good. People are like, well, of course we won, right? Of course we won. But no, it wasn't until the second engagement that we knew that. And in fact, after the first engagement was ending, the British had been defeated, the men were collecting trophies, they were drinking rum, command and control in effect had been lost. And it was at that moment that they hear the cannons and the musket fire of the reinforcement coming. And so many battles in history have been lost because of who got the last reinforcement. Could make a huge difference. And indeed, they were starting to push back the Americans. So as soon as they heard those guns, give credit where credit is due, Stark and Seth Warner, who was by his side, had a critical decision to make. They had won a victory of sorts. Maybe they should pull back to Bennington, to a more secure location. Because that, at least they could say they won some sort of a victory, but that's not what they did. Instead, they started grabbing guys, shoving them towards the sound of the guns, sending them along happily. A unit of Massachusetts militia showed up almost exactly at the right time under Captain Lane. They send him up. He gets up to the front where Thomas Mellon, in his account of the battle, about how seeing this Massachusetts militia captain ride up and having his horse immediately shot in the nose and the rump and dropping. And the captain just saying, "Come on, boys, let's go get him." So, and the fighting got pretty fierce. And in fact, it got very fierce and desperate. This was the part of the battle that John Stark called a continuous clap of thunder and described as some of the hottest fighting of his entire Revolutionary War career. And the sides were about evenly matched. So, to think about the Battle of Bennington, in just the first part, you're missing the heroic action of the second engagement, which was a much more difficult battle, and anyone's guess. And in fact, we weren't sure how it was going to go until, at that crucial moment, Seth Warner's unit, the Green Mountain Boys, the Green Mountain Rangers, finally arrived. They were late in getting to the battlefield. Warner had been there for days, working with Stark, doing the planning, getting everything ready. But his unit had been up in Manchester. They were doing sequestering, chasing out Tories, gathering rum, because you need that. And it wasn't until late in the day, on that fateful day of August 16th, like probably around 6:30 or 7 o'clock, getting towards evening, that they finally show up. And it ends up being at a critical moment. The Germans had been steadily, the Germans of course were the bulk of the force that the British had, so I apologize if that sounded confusing. Germans, British? Anyway, they had almost fought their way back to the Bennington battlefield, almost got back to recapturing the ground that we had taken at the start before they were finally pushed back. They were about to envelop and flank the American forces when Seth Warner's troops came up, and Seth did exactly what the British were trying to do. He sent them on flanks and pushed both those flanks back. And I think it was the David Holbrook account that talks about the classic, it was like shooting sheep or fish in a barrel, shooting sheep in a paddock or something like that. And that was the turning point in battle. And at that, they did push them all the way back to right in the center of the screen where you see the word Loomsack. There's a little marker there. And that's the point where the reinforcement was finally killed off to a large degree and lost the horses that were pulling their artillery. So they brought 2 more cannons to the battle, and this is the point where they lost their cannons. And in fact, according to one account, one of them was still loaded. So when it was captured by the Green Mountain Boys, one of them whipped that cannon around and fired it at the retreating Germans to great effect. And I gotta say, when they make the movie The Battle of Bennington, that's gotta be a scene in there, right? I mean, it's so perfect. It's like Hollywood made it up. So, anyway. So we have this history of commemoration. Of course, the Bennington Battle Day, only Texas has a state holiday also for a battle. Theirs is for San Jacinto Day, but they don't actually let anyone take the day off, so that's kind of sad. But of course we have ours, and I did mention some of these huge celebrations, and it's worth digging a little deeper, because in 1877, we had sitting President Rutherford B. Hayes come join us for the celebrations that year. And, you know, Rutherford had known about Vermont because he had served with the Vermont Brigade at the Battle of Cedar Creek in the Civil War. And I've often thought that perhaps one of the reasons that he came back to Bennington was to honor that connection with the Vermont Brigade, but also because this was a way for the country to reunite. Right? It was just a few years after the end of the Civil War. It was a fractured time in the country. It was nice to be able to harken back to a time when we were united against a common foe. And in fact, many of those Civil War units marched to Bennington in their old units to take part in the celebrations. 1891, dedication of the Battle Monument. Another sitting president coming to visit us, that time Benjamin Harrison. 1927, I always mention that just because it was so big. 100,000 people came for those commemorations that year. That's a big number. I wonder what the sanitation was like. And big celebrations, we mentioned the bicentennial. And of course, 1991, the bicentennial of statehood. Does anyone remember that? Yeah, some people do. So one fun thing about that one was when Vermont joined the Union, they had included a clause in the Constitution saying that after 200 years, Vermont could revisit whether or not we wanted to stay in. So indeed, in 1991, the Vermont legislature voted on whether or not to stay in the Union. Well, you know how that turned out. And sadly, they did not renew the clause. So we're in it for the long haul now. We're not going to be able to visit in another 200 years. So, the great hero, of course, of the Battle of Bennington is Stark, John Stark. And he was only available, of course, because he had felt snubbed by the Continental Congress. They didn't give him the promotion he wanted. So he said, heck, I'm going back with my musket to my state of New Hampshire. And happily, he was there when Vermont was being invaded. Ira Allen, brother of Ethan Allen, Heman Allen, he sends a letter to New Hampshire and says, we are your frontier. Please help us defend ourselves or you'll be next, basically. And they responded. Boy, did they respond. And someone who doesn't get as much credit as they should, John Langdon of New Hampshire, he's the one that actually financed it. He put up a silver plate from his household and a bunch of hogsheads of rum. Anyone know what's in a hogshead? I knew this at one point, I've forgotten. But it's a lot. It was like thousands of gallons of rum or something like that. Don't quote me on that. But he financed it, and then when John Stark accepted the command, the population just responded. He was their hero. He was the hero of Bunker Hill. Everyone knew him. He's his days of fame from Robert's Rangers, being captured by Indians. This guy was amazing. Everyone in New Hampshire knew him. And they came out in droves to join the New Hampshire Brigade to defend Vermont. Something like 1,800 people joined up, and I believe it was represented 10% of the able-bodied men of age at that time in New Hampshire. So that's a really incredible response from New Hampshire. That's why I feel bad about us annex. Sorry. So in 1809, during one of those annual celebrations of the Battle of Bennington, they write a letter to Stark. And they say, our young men don't remember what you look like. We've been telling them stories, but we would love to have you come visit us and celebrate with us this year. And John Stark at that time, he writes a letter, part of which is here on the screen, but to the effect of, I'm sorry, I'm too old, the heart's willing, but the body is not, I can't really make the trip. But he writes this wonderful letter, and he ends it with this salute, this toast to the veterans of the Battle of Bennington, and he says, live free or die. Some things are worse than death. And of course you might recognize that first part, because that is now on all the New Hampshire license plates. I guess they couldn't fit the whole thing on there. So, live free or die. That's where it comes from. And in Bennington, there is actually a bronze plaque in our four corners with the entirety of that letter written on it. He also gives a shout out to the ladies and the role that they played at the Battle of Bennington and in war in general. So that was really nice to see that. All right, now, people that have seen my presentation before, you might know this one. Does anyone recognize these venerable eyes? So these are the eyes of a gentleman who is looking at the final approved design of the Bennington Battle Monument. So, drum roll, dun dun dun! What? Yeah. They had created this committee to design the Battle Monument. And it was all a bunch of high respected mucky-muck type people and whatnot. And this is what they came up with. And here's whose those eyes belong to. Because this is Highland Hall. Former governor of Vermont, father of Turner Park, who built the Park McCullough House. He took one look at that design and said, no way. No way is that lame grouping of statues going to honor our Battle of Bennington. We need something monumental and lofty. And at the time, he was in his 80s. He went around to that entire committee and changed their minds. And instead, we got what we have today. The monumental and lofty Bennington Battle Monument. The tallest man-made building in the state of Vermont to this day. I used to say the tallest structure, but I'm told that we have some windmills that are taller. Yeah. So, to my mind, by the way, this is the most popular historic site in the state of Vermont. It's also their biggest moneymaker. Needs a little work. You might have heard something about that. But really an amazing structure. It's an unreinforced building, and I think the message that Highland Hall is sharing with us is that we can dare to think big. You don't have to settle if you're passionate about something. So my thanks to Phil Holland for these next few slides. He's an author and historian from the Bennington area, if you don't know Phil. He wrote a very nice book on the Battle of Bennington and the Battle Monument, now in its second edition, so if you're looking for some good reading, it's very good. And he shared some of these slides with me. So this is the Battle Monument being built, 6,000 stones used. The cornerstone laid by the masons with all the appropriate rituals. The middle one shows what it looks like, totally encased in scaffolding, which we will see again in our lifetimes. Interestingly, there was an accident. Someone fell during the construction and apparently smashed through a couple dozen of those levels before finally having his fall, being arrested. And happily, he was not too seriously injured because he was at work the very next day. Wow. And on the right, of course, that's the finished monument. You can see the horse-drawn carriages in front. Let's remember, this was dedicated in 1891. I think it was finished in 1887 or 88 is when they finished it, but they waited a few years for that dedication. All right, so speaking of some of those past commemorations, here we go. This is the centennial. So 1877, that's 100 years after 1777, the birth of Vermont. So this is the centennial of the creation of Vermont. And they did an archway across Main Street in Bennington here. It was a rainy day, as you can see, with all the umbrellas. But it did not dampen anyone's spirits. And of course, as mentioned, Rutherford B. Hayes and most of his cabinet was there in Bennington for that. And they're the tenting grounds. Remember I mentioned that a lot of those Civil War units had marched up together? These were their encampments. And you can see sort of handwritten in the top right, if you've ever been through Bennington, you've seen the old First Church. It's just south of that, on the hill above where there's now the hospital. And that large tent that you can sort of see in the center, that was the oration tent, seated 3,000 people. And they could project without amplification. I'm sort of amazed that they could do that. So I guess we have a thing for archways in Bennington. This is the 1891 celebration. And if you've been to Bennington, if you look through the center, that's the Putnam Motel, or Putnam Hotel, excuse me, that is still there in the four corners of Bennington. And of course this archway, it's not actually stone, it's canvas painted to look like stone. It supported a choir of 100 young ladies who sang on the archway as the parade marched underneath. And again, this was the centennial of our being accepted into the Union. So 1791 is when we became the 14th state, and this was 100 years after that. Of course, it wouldn't have taken so long to become the 14th state, except for New York not wanting to give up their claims to Vermont. Fun fact, Alexander Hamilton, anyone heard of him? Made famous by Lin-Manuel's wonderful Broadway play, which my daughter and I memorized. A lot of car rides represented there. He was one of the lawyers that helped arrange for the settlement between New York and Vermont. So that's a fun little connection there for Hamilton. Oh, and by the way, 1891, a 19-year-old star-eyed Calvin Coolidge was in the crowd watching the celebrations. Of course, he then would later become President of the United States, and sadly did not come for the 1927 celebrations. He was busy apparently in DC, but that is kind of sad. So here's 1911 celebration with the Main Street electrified. 1911 electricity was brand new. So this was a way to make that year's celebration extra special. There's 1927, where Calvin Coolidge did not come. But as you can see, it was a very large, well-attended parade, and of course 100,000 people, as we said, just absolutely humongous. And of course many of us remember the bicentennial. And for me that is especially significant because when I reflect now, part of the reason I'm sitting here is partly because of those bicentennial celebrations. So think about that. I was 8 or 9 years old. I was in 3rd grade. But all was not kumbaya and love and whatnot. But of course, so some of the bitterness that has attended planning came to the surface. This particular article written by Rob Wilmington, who's actually a pretty famous lawyer in our region, now retired. They were upset because someone had put signs up for something that was happening at the battlefield. Remember the battlefield in New York? Oh my God! This was just a horrible controversy. A lot of people were upset. But it was not all bad either, because many, in the aftermath of the bicentennial, there was also articles talking about how neighbors that hadn't spoken for years got together and together celebrated the bicentennial. So it did also have a unifying effect, despite the fact that it was a little bit of a rocky start. So there it is, there's the encampment in Bennington. You can see the monument, sort of suspiciously tipped in the top right. I've always wondered about that. There was a lot more articles written, again, by Rob Wilmington and others. I love that picture on the left. It almost looks like Woodstock, right? But that was the crowd at the battle reenactment. I was there somewhere, and then a picture, kind of hard to see. But here's a better one. This is that battle reenactment at Willow Park, and if you've ever been to Willow Park now, it doesn't look anything like this. It's been totally developed. And here's another battle, of course, showing the vaunted 76 flag, which we now know never flew at the Battle of Bennington, but at that time we did think that was the case. Governor and Mrs. Snelling, at the Battle Day Parade that weekend, 1977. Dressed appropriately, I might add. So that's what we've done in the past. And then starting in 2021, that was the first of our 250th anniversary commemorations. That was the 250th anniversary of the Breckenridge standoff. That was the first armed confrontation between the New York authorities and the settlers of what would later become Vermont. At that point, it was still the New Hampshire Grants. Then on the bottom right, that was the capture and rescue of Remember Baker, which happened on, I think, March 16th of 1772. And we reenacted that. We reenacted the scene, and actually some members of our audience here today participated in that event. Fun fact, during the actual rescue and capture and rescue, he was attacked in his home. This being Remember Baker of East Arlington. What a great name, though, by the way. Remember, and his wife Desire. So Remember and Desire Baker. Wow, what a power couple name. So they break into his house in the middle of the night. They're attacking him and his family. He runs upstairs to try to draw them away from his family, who were being brutalized. He jumps out of the second floor window into waist-deep snow. Whereas in 2022, it was 50 degrees and sunny. No snow anywhere. Lots of bluegrass. 2023 was a little different, and actually a lot of the action in 2023 was right around this area. This was the New York surveyors coming to these parts, surveying land, installing New York settlers, and then shortly after being chased out by Green Mountain Boys who were coming up defending the New Hampshire grants over those. So for that, we ended up doing a couple of sort of like flash mobby things, where basically, you know, one guy dressed in 18th century funny clothes walks into a bar. And I know this sounds like a start of a very bad joke. And he goes in and he says, I'm looking for the Catamount Tavern. And the barkeep's like, what are you talking about? The Catamount Tavern burned down like 150 years ago. And he's like, what? How can that be? And then shortly after, more people in 18th century garb come in, and more come in and start having a conversation about all these troubles with New York. And then Ethan Allen shows up. And of course, he's Ethan Allen, he's bold and brash, and he's telling us, we're never going to stand for this, we'll kick him out. And then sort of at the climax of that, you hear a siren, and outside, the cops pull up and show up at the bar and arrest Ethan Allen. And we did this a couple of times, and it was pretty hilarious. You can see a video of it on YouTube. Just search for a bounty for the capture of Ethan Allen, and you can have that little experience. So I think for the people in those bars, at that moment, something important happened, something unexpected, and hopefully something that got them thinking about the 250th, at least we hope so. 2024 was a little more structured. This was the year we did a Liberty Pole raising. Liberty poles were a big deal in the Revolutionary times, especially building up to the Revolution. Picture the scene, it was prior to cell phones and mass communications, so they would put up a Liberty pole kind of as a thumbing their nose at the British, but it was also like an informational thing. They would hammer up notices, need a post runner, have to have your own good horse, and then also their grievances to the crown. This would all be, the British would come, they would cut it down, we would put it back up, that's how it went. So we did a Liberty pole raising, and we also started to develop more of a reenactor group for our region, because one of the things we had seen through these prior years was how important reenactors were to getting the public excited. So we wanted to make sure we always had a steady pool of them. And in that first couple of years, our local VFW sponsored a group of reenactors, and then eventually our local group merged with a group that's actually based right around here, headquartered in, I guess, Shrewsbury, you could say, called Whitcomb's Rangers. I don't know if any of you folks have heard of that, but we're now fully embedded with that group, much to our joy. So we did a number of events. We also did a lot of outreach with students. That's a very important theme for us. 2025, this was our first anniversary year. Huzzah! Finally made it, right? And we're 53 minutes into this. How are people holding up?
Good.
People good? Yeah? Doing all right? Okay. So this, of course, our feature event started right at the beginning of the year, that May 2nd through 9th. That was the expedition to Ticonderoga. We started down in Connecticut. We had a very nice event in Hartford, Connecticut at their old original state house to kick off the expedition, because that was one of the two prongs. One started in Hartford, Connecticut, another started in Boston. The one in Connecticut, that was with Edward Mott and Noah Phelps and others. The one in Boston was under Benedict Arnold. Now, Edward Mott gets to Bennington first, hires the Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys, and they set off. And hot on their heels is Benedict Arnold, chasing to catch up. He finally does catch up to them, just somewhere around Castleton. Not at Remington's Tavern, we don't think, but short nearby. And then they come to an agreement, and, well, let's put it this way. If you know anything about Benedict Arnold, he was a great hero of the American Revolution, until he wasn't. And is now, of course, synonymous with a traitor in our country. But at that point, he was a heroic figure, or trying to be. He catches up, but he's only got one guy with him, his personal manservant. And he's like, "I'm here to take command." And Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys were like, "We don't know who you are, and you have no army with you." So Ethan Allen was actually fairly gracious for him, I think, and he allows him to come alongside him for the capture, although he does neglect to even mention his name in his letter to Congress talking about the victory. So that was a great start for us. The governor recognized it, declared a week in honor of Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys. We had this whole series of events, again, starting in Connecticut, following the route all the way through Massachusetts. This is why those regional partnerships with other states is so important. Did our thing all through Vermont, through Castleton, some wonderful events there. Finally up to Hans Cove, which at the time was Herrick's Cove. And then, of course, across the lake to the capture of Ticonderoga, and then the next day, Crown Point. This was huge. Not just because this was known as the Gibraltar of the North. This was a huge, important British fort, although at the time, sadly in disrepair, only guarded by, I think, 28, 48 guys, something like that. They literally, nobody had, the news traveled slower back then. They did not know war had broken out. So it was a surprise attack. There was no losses on either side, but a stunning victory. And one that provided the necessary artillery to raise the siege of Boston, to get the British out of Boston. So that had huge repercussions. Something you may be hearing about right now, the Knox Artillery Trail. It's the 250th anniversary of this epic journey by Henry Knox and his men to bring those artillery from all the way up on Lake Champlain to Boston in the dead of winter. A pretty impressive achievement. By the way, we did create a video of that. You can watch it again on YouTube. Just search for Expedition to Capture Fort Ticonderoga. You can see that and enjoy it. So I do want to just focus a little bit, refocus back on the importance of education in this. We've taken a deep dive in our region to bring these stories to our youth. And we've been pretty successful. And I have to say, I should preface it by saying, the first time we went and did a program at the Mount Anthony Union Middle School for 7th graders, this is the year they're supposed to be learning about Vermont history, and we came to them with a 2-week deep dive into the Battle of Bennington. The majority of them did not know what the battle monument was there for. Wow. That's pretty shocking. It was depressing at first, and then really exciting. Because by the end, these kids were excited and engaged and talking knowledgeably about this in a way that was very heartwarming. So, but that illustrates that we can take it for granted, right? We think our kids are learning everything they need to know, and they're learning a lot, and there's so many things to learn, but our history, and Vermont history in particular, is so unique and special that it needs to be focused on. And there's an important economic development component to that as well. We have a problem with our young people leaving the state and not coming back. Hey, leave the state, go other places. I did. I think it's the best thing you can do. Then you appreciate the place you came from. But part of that appreciation comes from your knowledge and appreciation for the local history from where you came from. So the more we can instill in that, the more economic benefit we'll have by retaining or bringing back those young people to Vermont. And of course, we're happy to welcome other people to Vermont as well. But education, really important, and they love it. The kids are ready for these stories. So here we are, it's 2026, woohoo! Yay! Now, we've actually got a pretty long list already started in Bennington, and you can actually go to bennington250.org to hear about the details of that list. But suffice to say, one thing we're focusing on is something we're calling civic season. I didn't invent the phrase. Smarter people than I came up with that. But the idea is to take the newest federal holiday, which is Juneteenth, and the oldest federal holiday, which is the 4th of July, and take that period between June 19th and the 4th of July to highlight how important these stories are. And for us, that means a bunch of presentations, lectures, tours, various activities throughout that period. We also have, there's a list of like 50 things you could do in civic season to remember your history or get involved in your local community. And that's all things that we're going to be pushing out for 2026. And of course, 4th of July, that's a big deal. We're all going to be participating in this. In, I think, 1964, there was a law passed encouraging municipalities to have bell ringing ceremonies as part of their 4th of July. They suggest at 2 p.m. or other such time as your local municipality shall prefer. Isn't that lovely, that language? But the idea to, again, to remember why we're having a 4th of July, not just to have some hot dogs and some fireworks. Interestingly, there's been an effort, and this comes from Hawaii, one of our partners, thinking about the 250th. Of course, they're not one of the original 13 colonies, about as far from it as you could possibly be. They had an interesting idea. They said, let's share the spirit of America by doing a reading of the Declaration of Independence together, simultaneously, by using the time zones. So for us here, it would be at 6 p.m., and then various other times, depending on where you are in the United States, right over to Hawaii, so we can all read the Declaration together. Why July 8th? Because that's the day that it was first announced in Philadelphia. They signed it on the 4th of July, but nobody knew. They didn't announce it until July 8th. And in fact, I don't think it was until July 18th or something that the news got to Massachusetts. And do you remember when it got to Mount Independence?
July 26th, it was read, and they're going to read it publicly on July 25th, a Saturday this time.
That is awesome. And fun fact, it used to be called Rattle.
Right.
Oh, go ahead, tell the story.
Well, no, just of all the places in Vermont that ought to celebrate the Declaration, that one because of the name, Mount Independence.
Yeah.
Was renamed.
And prior to that, of course, we all know it was called Rattlesnake Hill. But renamed Mount Independence as it is to this day. Thank you for that, Tom. We appreciate it. There's also news, Michigan has an idea, something about America's Picnic / potluck. I'm not exactly sure. It's basically just our traditional picnics writ large, but there's going to be an informational call about that next week, so I'll log into that.
On the 5th.
On the 5th of February, is that what it is?
No, July 5th this year.
Is the America's Picnic Pie. Correct, yeah, so I didn't have that date on there. So that's another thing that's happening at the national level that we could and perhaps should participate in here in Vermont. So if you're thinking, well, there's some easy things to do here in Clarendon, well, there's some suggestions for you. Let's see. So part of our build up to 2027 is we want the Battle of Bennington to get more and more exciting because we've been commemorating it every year. 249th year celebrating it this year. Can we think of anything different to do? Well, here's an idea. What about running a train through the middle of the battlefield? It's like, wait a minute, what? Well, first of all, are you serious? There's a train going through the middle of the Bennington battlefield? Yeah, it's kind of shocking. I guess like armies, trains want to follow the path of least resistance. And yes, in the center of the Bennington battlefield, right down there by that bridge position, there is a 12-foot high raised railway bed. And it goes right through the battlefield. And interestingly, it kind of follows the route that Stark took with the main part of his force to the battle. And then beyond, it goes right alongside that second engagement. And there's even a location where we can stop the train at that second engagement battle marker where they spun the cannon around. So we're like, maybe we could do that. And surprisingly, New York agreed. They are going to fund us to hire a train to go through the battlefield. Now, fun fact, even though it's in New York, Vermont Railways owns that section of track. I was like, oh my God, that is like, clearly this was meant to be. So here's the battlefield, and you can see that little museum-like icon there. That's what is now called the Barnett House. It's more or less on the footprint of a house called the Beardsley House that was there at the time of the battle. That's the bridge position. That's the center of the battlefield. Up in the top left, there's the Bennington Battlefield Historic Site. Up on the hill, the extreme left of the British position, that's where everyone thinks the battle happened. And part of the battle happened there, but it wasn't the center part. The center part was down in the middle. And remember how I talked about how that map that Durnford made was flipped on its side? So I slapped that map on here. I had to flip it on its side, so it's kind of facing north. And I've sort of like, I faded it out so you can see how it translates to the actual area. And that yellow highlighted line, that's that railway bed. So if you're looking for something fun to do this August, come down, try this interpretive train ride. We're going to have a narrated story about the battle and what you're seeing as you go by. There'll also be conductors dressed in 18th century period garb to introduce the information and answer questions. So that's something fun and different. We're doing it for one day in 2026, and we're going to do it for 2 days in 2027. But we thought, you know, this is kind of a big project. Let's try it out the year before the 250th, work out the kinks, make sure it all works according to plan, and then double down on it for 2027. So, and of course that gets us to 2027, our signature anniversary year. So whatever we do this year is really a build-up for that. It's the culmination of the emergence of this amazing Vermont Republic. It's the story of the 1777 campaign, which is arguably the turning point of the American Revolution. So what does that look like? We start at the very beginning of the year in January. That's that Westminster Declaration of Independence. Vermont is now going to be independent, not just from England, but from New York and New Hampshire. And we're going to call ourselves New Connecticut. Yay! Yay! Well, so many people from Vermont, in Vermont, had come from Connecticut. Ethan Allen, all his brothers, they're from like Salisbury, Connecticut. So that was the original idea, but happily they changed the name in time for that signing of the Constitution on July 8th. Again, the day after the Battle of Hubbardton. And you know, the Vermont Constitution is worthy of remembering. It was the first democratic constitution on the North American continent, 10 years before the writing of the U.S. Constitution. But, if you're paying attention, as I know some people are in this room, didn't New Hampshire do a constitution in January of 1776 this year? So in fact, just a few weeks ago was the 250th anniversary of New Hampshire's constitution? Well, sort of. That year, Benning Wentworth, he was the governor of New Hampshire. That's where Bennington gets its name, from Benning Wentworth. He was a very modest individual. He literally just picks up his bags and leaves. He sees the writing on the wall. He abandons New Hampshire. New Hampshire has no government. So they write to Congress, the Continental Congress, they're like, what do we do? And they're like, come up with something. So they do. They write a temporary constitution, and they're very specific about it. This is just the document until things get sorted, just for the period of the war. And in truth, 1784, a year after the war is over, they do enact a constitution that they have to this day. So while it is true that New Hampshire had a constitution of sorts prior to Vermont's, again, you now know me. I like to find those things where Vermont tries to be unique. So there you have it. But it was also the first constitution to outlaw adult slavery. Imperfectly implemented. The preacher at the old First Church, or the meeting house at the time, had a slave. Other people had slaves. And it didn't say anything about child slavery, or it outlawed adult slavery, but you could still have child slavery, because remember, indenture was a thing, and it's essentially a form of slavery. So that was still allowed. But the heart was in the right place. And in fact, it was Ebenezer Allen emancipates a woman in Dorset by the name of Dinah Mattis. It was one of the first examples of that. And his letter of emancipation is in the town clerk's office in Bennington. And, as mentioned earlier, it was the first constitution to have universal suffrage if you were white and if you were male. But still, this was way better than anything else. It was a radical idea. I mean, I can't emphasize enough how crazy that idea was. But they were the first to do it, and that was what made them so attractive to those New York farmers. Because my goodness, not only can I own my own land, I can have a say in my own government. Revolutionary ideas. By the way, I think one of the reasons why New Hampshire wanted a temporary constitution was because what if we lost? Then they say, oh, that was just temporary. We're not really serious about that. Anyway, I digress. So, all these points I mentioned, they have their flaws, but the flaws help illustrate the unfinished nature of the Declaration of Independence and the ideas and ideals that were illuminated in that document. Promises that we're still working to fulfill today. So, worthy of commemorating in any case. All right. That's all I got for you tonight. Any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, just still
Well done. Well done. Thank you, Jonah. Really appreciate it. Is there a place, you have a website where people can go? I have it on my desktop, but I can't tell.
So, Benny, go ahead.
The events, all the events this year.
Yes.
Where people can look it up and
Hopefully it's easy to remember. It's Bennington250.org.
and that's for the whole, everything going on in the state.
Well, so that's for our region and our friends nearby. The state of Vermont has a website as well. And they don't have much on there for events yet. Do you?
They don't, they recommend it, you put it on the VermontVacations.com website.
So go to Vermont Vacations, and you'll be able to, they're setting up a filter for 250th events, so you can just search specifically for 250th events.
Be persistent, it's very hard to find.
Gotcha. And most of our events are not on there yet, because they want a specific format, and not all of our events, which come from all sorts of different people, historical societies, etc., they're not necessarily always easy to get on there. So I would say look in both places and you'll get a pretty good sense of what's going on.
Now, the select board meeting a couple of meetings back, it was brought up in Clarendon to partner with Rutland, who are planning to do some activities for the 250th this July. And one of the things I guess being floated by Rutland is shutting down 7 for parade. And they did part of that, and of course the question was brought up that can they do that? And apparently in 2023 or 4, they shut down part of Route 7 for the fair, fair parade. So that's something and I need to follow up myself on, because I certainly would want to be involved in anything that Rutland's doing, or Clarendon involved in the 250. Colonel Stark's monument grave is over here in this field. Can't see it at nighttime. I was hoping.
Joseph Waitley.
Joseph Waitley, what did I say?
John Stark. Hey, I love him too.
Yeah. Well, Joseph Waite is over here in this field. It's on private property. The Pinkowskis are very good, but if there's anybody here who wants to wander up and take a look at it, once the spring comes, feel free to reach out to me, because I don't want all of a sudden to tell me say I've sent a bunch of people traipsing across the property, but I'll be more than willing to make time to take people out there and take a look at it. In 2020, you saw what it looked like, up until 2024, it was about 5 or 6 inches lower in the ground, the water was filling in on it, I had to keep cutting the grass back, I said, you know, I'm gonna raise the flat stone, so I worked a job where you took partners, so if something happens, you know, so I convinced Barry, Tom, and Bob, and one more guy, we went out there, and we lifted the stone up, like I said, it was down on the ground, we put a whole bunch of shore pack out in there, and we set the stone back and cut the grass back, and that's what it looks like this picture. Well, that's about 5 foot long stone right there. So, I was I woke up that morning, you know, just kind of butterflies in my stomach. I mean, I put a lot of stones together over the course of my life, or the course of the last few years. But I was had a lot of butterflies with this one because it's just not it's got a little more value to the state and to the community than a lot of other stones, you know, just start picking up and have a gear snap. Barry, what'd you do? So anyways, but if anybody wants to, you can reach out to me. I'll be glad to take anybody out there anytime. It is, you know,
And in terms of time, might I suggest September 23rd of this year would be the 250th anniversary of this town.
get on that schedule.
Right?
Yeah, September, yeah. And you know, and Bob and I talk about it all the time. I mean, probably one of the most famous spots in Clarendon, most famous people in Clarendon had no ties to Clarendon. You know, just happened to die here. And one of the things you've been trying, you know, kind of kicking around somewhat is if he passed here, the army must have been coming down through this area. And somehow we can figure that out. Maybe Barry has got some information on it. But the army must have been coming down through here for him. That's the place where he died. He was buried.
In that photo where you see the white area around the edges, those parts were underground.
Wow. So,
Yeah.
looking at my schedule, that is a Wednesday, and I currently have nothing planned, so if you want to have some Green Mountain Boys show up and do a musket salute as part of any event you might want to do, just let us know.
Okay,
What's
You
up?
said the 23rd up there, it says 28.
Oh, I apologize, 28.
So what day of the week is that?
28, that is,
Sunday, right?
let's say Monday.
Monday. Works for me.
Yeah.
You're retired, of course it works for you.
That'd be neat.
He was still alive on the 27th of Sunday. He was still alive on Sunday the 27th.
Yeah, he was. So,
Just let's schedule it earlier in the day so I can get back to Bennington for a select board meeting.
well, probably Monday's our next word. Probably, I don't know.
Oh, well, maybe they want to attend something like that.
Well, you know,
I could probably get a day off from that.
You know, but I just brought that up, that I'm going right home and start making a note, and start working on that.
Thanks. And thank you for that catch, the 3 and the 8 with my old eyes.
Right. That's that. Tom.
Yeah, Jonah, a couple of, first of all, thanks for coming up with this.
Great.
Yeah.
First of all, Kevin and I have been going back to Westminster with the Westminster Massacre Patriots are buried, doing the restoration job in there again. So that's twice people will be going down there. So of all the things that we get involved with, I think that's, especially this time with 250.
From 8 till noon on what day?
I don't have it on my
It'll be
I can
Saturday. It's in May, is it in May or June?
It's a big, I can send it to you. I told you what it was. And the other thing was with the monument, I saw the cost for restoration, and I also seen all these things floating around. Is there any money or anything that, I saw the latest thing to do the restoration of it?
So let me start by saying that $40 million number that
Yeah.
we is based on nothing.
Oh, was, okay.
There's no estimate yet on the cost. I don't know where that number came from. It caught fire because it's a big number. It's going to be a lot, but it's not going to be 40 million. Well, maybe, but I doubt it.
Let's hope.
So we don't know what the cost will be, but we do know it's gonna be a lot. And I would also argue that whatever it is, we need to come up with the money for it. This is too important to let it just fall away.
This has been up to you on your, it is quite, and it's, you know, if you can, try and, if you ever go again, on a time of day with sunshine, blue sky, give the views are beautiful. And as Tom has mentioned, of course, we could put a picture of the Volca cemetery work, but we are going to be working down Westminster Cemetery where, you know, a lot of the patrons are buried this year, this summer. If anybody wants to be involved, it's on our Volca schedule. Be in touch with me or whatever. It's a Saturday, 8 to 12. We eat good afterwards.
Yeah, they feed us very well down there, yes.
But it's interesting, it's, you know, community, and any Volca, you know, you go to some of these communities, they really come out, people come out, appreciate the work being done. So, anything else? Well, thank you once again, Jonah. Each one of you want to drive safely.